Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on behalf of a special partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Sunday, January 22nd, 2023. And if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide, you can always go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S., and with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left, you point and click on this map. It'll bring up a forecast with any relevant watches or warnings, advisories for anywhere in the country, and there's all sorts of other information that you can go along here and explore. But on the map this Sunday afternoon, the lower 48, the biggest thing of note is in the northeast, there's a winter storm warning. Areas of New York State up into southern New England, as much as 6 to 12 inches of snow may fall with a storm like that. Not an exceptionally big storm for those folks for this time of year. Then further in the west, we have throughout the southern Rockies areas of winter weather advisories, some stronger winds, and even in the Sacramento Valley, the threat of freezing temperatures now through Tuesday morning. So definitely a pretty cold bout of air out there in areas of the western U.S. But we have some very cold temperatures up across the interior. That is going to begin to break down, actually slide southwestward out over the northern and central Bering as we go through the week. But strong winds along the west coast have produced very cold wind chills and even blizzard conditions in the Yukon Delta. I'll show you that more in a moment. Multiple rounds of mainly light precipitation are anticipated this coming week over south central areas that could make roadways slick. We're going to get temperatures back up near freezing and even some rain then moving out up in through Kenai Peninsula, up into the Anchorage Bowl, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. And then frontal systems coming in off the Gulf will produce as much as an inch or two of rainfall, especially late Tuesday night into Wednesday. It's going to be a more active pattern coming up here as we close out the month of January, but it's also going to bring warmer temperatures to much of the mainland. Looking at a few of the FAA webcams this afternoon, off to the north, Galena this morning got down to 44 below zero. Current temperature early afternoon, mostly clear, 27 below. A cooperative observer 15 miles northeast of Manly Hot Springs dipped down to 48 below. And it was 40 below at Nanana. Now over at Chivak there in the southwest, they have blizzard conditions. Winds have been gusting there as high as 50, 60 miles an hour with wind chills of 40 to 50 below. Blizzard warning remains in effect for the lower Yukon Delta until at least 9 p.m. this evening, and that could be, if the blowing snow reduces, still could have a wind chill advisory then issued from that point on overnight and into Monday. Otherwise, another area we're keeping an eye on is especially the Susitna region, Susitna Valley. We're going to get warmer air push up that. Heavy snow, there is potential for around and over a foot of snow in Denali State Park. Is where the heaviest snow will fall there, just to the north and west of Talkeetna, but mostly cloudy there this afternoon, 23. Gulkana, another spot that will picking up some snow as this next push of moisture comes in off the Gulf. Right now, just a little bit of light snow and fog this Sunday early afternoon with a temperature of 14. So here are the advisories, warnings. We have winter weather advisories here, the central and eastern portions of the Yukon Valley, Bettles, Tanana, up through Fort Yukon. Some light snow, cold temperatures, breezy conditions. Fairbanks, we'll see some snow moving in. Special weather statement for that, especially for the morning and evening commutes on Monday. And then further west, these are wind chill advisories, Galena, Ambler, westward, all along Kotzebue, as well as Norton Sounds, coastal areas of the Seward Peninsula. Wind chills will be as cold as 40, 50 below. And then the areas here along the Yukon Delta as we go from Hooper Bay down toward Bethel, blizzard warning. At least until 9 p.m. this Sunday evening. It could potentially be either extended or in place of that later on once the blowing snow stops being such a problem, reducing visibility. It could end up being then a wind chill advisory. And then finally, out here in south central areas, special weather statement has been put out for the western Kenai up through the Anchorage Bowl and Palmer area on over toward the Copper River Basin. There are going to be multiple rounds of mixed precipitation possible this week as temperatures slowly warm. We're going to get warmer air pushing gradually northward through the week. So as a result, we're going to see precipitation in many of these areas changing over to rain. Right now, the Susitna Valley, especially the areas north and west of Talkeetna, could see around or as much as 20 inches of snow there in areas around Denali State Park, and the bulk of that coming tomorrow into early Tuesday morning. So keep that in mind because temperatures there in south central areas will be moderating. On the satellite imagery this afternoon, you can just see this push of moisture lifting out of the North Pacific. We currently have a couple of low pressure waves that are riding here along the Gulf Coast and then also back here into the central portion of the Aleutians. And we have the strong winds out of the northeast coming out to here along the west coast that are creating those bitter cold wind chills, as well as the blizzard conditions there, especially through the Yukon Delta. And looking at, again, the repeat of that loop, you see the moisture pulling northward. The really cold air that's right now residing here over this portion of the Yukon Valley is eventually going to slide off toward the southwest out over the northern and central Bering as we go through this midweek. And then the warmer air is going to creep upward. And whenever you bring warmer air on top of colder air, it's not a good thing in the wintertime because it tends to produce precipitation, and then it can be a mixed variety. So here is the frontal system this afternoon. We got a little low pressure wave south of Kodiak Island. This is the main low right now, south of the eastern Aleutians and tip of the Alaska Peninsula. But there's a frontal band coming in that's going to bring in some moderate to briefly heavier rain along areas of the Gulf Coast into the Panhandle tonight. That front will come north and weaken. And then we have a continuation of a couple of waves of low pressure, the main area sitting back here toward the central Aleutians. Still the strong pressure gradient creating the blowing snow there along areas of the west coast into Monday. And there's going to be another surge of moisture coming up out of the North Pacific. Monday afternoon, there's that next low. And as we go into Tuesday, notice this is going to be a healthier push of milder air and some deeper moisture along this front. So that's the one that's going to bring the 1 to 2 inches of rain to areas along the northern Gulf Coast into the Panhandle, especially late Tuesday into Wednesday. This boundary, the coldest air still will remain north and west of the Alaska Range, but begin to slide southwestward as we head into midweek as this warmer air gradually takes over. The warmer air always comes in aloft first before it can at the surface. So that means areas along the Cook Inlet and the Gulf Coast will see the warmer temperatures first at the surface before they can work their way further north into some of the higher elevations. But in the meantime, temperatures tonight still around 20 in the Anchorage Bowl, but generally above freezing Juneau southward. And then for the day, Monday afternoon, we'll see 40-degree readings at Kodiak. Still, though, sub-zero. Other side of the Alaska Range at McGrath, 14 below, 25 around Gulkana, Glen Allen, and then the outer coastal areas of the Panhandle, at least low to mid-40s, Ketchikan up through Sitka. And lows Tuesday morning will continue to creep upward. May not be near freezing come Tuesday morning in Anchorage. And then by Tuesday afternoon, notice the warmer air pushing northward. Should get temperatures warming above freezing up toward Willow as we get into Tuesday morning and afternoon as well. And temperatures could be up into the mid to nearing upper 40s in portions there of the lower Panhandle. Notice how cold it is, though, across much of the north, especially north of the Alaska Range through the Yukon Valley. Still could see some isolated 40-degree below readings yet tonight into Monday morning, but otherwise widespread brisk winds continue here in these areas of the west central interior along the northwest coast with wind chills in some areas as cold as 50 below. And then Monday afternoon, still sub-zero temperatures, very common, but the warmer air will be creeping up very slowly from the south. Tuesday morning lows still sub-zero along and especially north of the Yukon River. And then as we get into Tuesday afternoon, notice along the Alaska Range coming up a bit, readings maybe 16 or so there at Healy. And then as we go Out through the Alaska Peninsula, we're looking at temperatures sub-zero up through the Yukon, Kuskokwim basins, 40-ish there, Dutch Harbor. Tuesday morning, similar thing, but readings still upper 30s to maybe near 40, extending out the Alaska Peninsula. The main thing is, as we end up the month, January 28th through February 1st, much above normal temperatures centered on the west and southwest side of the state. Above normal precipitation coming in with that moisture off the Bering Sea, especially up there from Bethel north through Nome and Kotzebue and Ambler. So definitely a pattern shift is coming here toward the end of the month.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's now time for your aviation weather. Have a flight planned this Monday or Tuesday. The main weather news will be areas of low pressure lifting out of the North Pacific, bringing milder air as the flow aloft in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere is going to be more southerly, allowing as this milder air comes northward, we'll see precipitation along the Gulf Coast in through the Panhandle with some frontal waves, as well as low pressure waves, and then also riding up through Cook Inlet and up through and especially south side of the Alaska Range. IFR widespread Monday morning across the North Slope, Arctic coast, much of the Panhandle, along the Gulf Coast westward across the Alaska Peninsula and in through the lower Bering Sea. Come Monday afternoon, we see a broad swath of IFR from the Arctic coast along the North Slope through the Yukon, central upper Yukon Valley, western half of the Alaska Range, all along much of the Gulf Coast inner channels of the Panhandle, then back out through the lower Bering, including Pribilof Islands. And then for Tuesday morning, more of the same thing. We see the IFR conditions persisting in similar areas, much of the Panhandle being IFR, and extending westward again across the lower half of the Bering. For Tuesday afternoon, still a large area of IFR in the north along the Arctic coast, east of Utqiagvik, along the North Slope, Brooks Range, and just north of the Yukon River. A broad area of IFR conditions from the Panhandle westward across the Gulf Coast, eastern Kenai, Kodiak Island, westward through Bristol Bay, and again, all the way back there toward St. Paul. And we do anticipate IFR conditions to be the general rule. Anatuvik Pass northward, south of there, MVFR. Adigan Pass, the same thing. Generally, IFR conditions through the northern half of the pass, especially on up into the North Slope, but to MVFR south of the south entrance. Lake Clark and Merrill socked in with IFR conditions and precipitation. There could be some icing and a mix of precipitation at times, especially toward Cook Inlet. Rainy Pass IFR, Windy Pass IFR as we round up through the central Alaska Range. Isabel IFR Monday morning, trying to give way to MVFR conditions, and then Metasta Pass there further east, kind of in a little pocket of drier air. MVFR conditions could possibly briefly break out to VFR in the vicinity of the pass there toward the Alcan border. Now further south and west, IFR conditions, Tanita Pass giving way to MVFR conditions on Monday. Further south, Portage Pass will be socked in with IFR conditions, especially mid-pass through the east entrance and on out into Prince William Sound. MVFR as you fly further west there of the west entrance. And then finally, Chilkoot and White there in the far northern Panhandle. IFR will be the rule. Freezing levels aloft are rather low, only around 2,000 feet through the northern Gulf, 4,000 feet as you get out toward Haida Gwaii, and 6,000 feet there just out there through along the British Columbia coast. The surface freezing line runs from just south of St. Paul along the upper Alaska Peninsula and then along coastal areas of the northwestern, north central Gulf into the inner channels and inner coastal mountains of the Panhandle. Greatest threat for icing, some moderate icing is possible along the northern Gulf Coast in through the Panhandle, especially from around Prince William Sound, eastern Kenai, again southeastward all the way down through Haida Gwaii and along the British Columbia coast, generally above 4,000 feet in the northern Gulf and above 6,000 feet as you get there down toward Haida Gwaii and British Columbia. Upper level jet stream winds are strongest. We do have this ridging coming up into the lower Gulf, North Pacific interface, upwards of 100, 110 knots. High pressure, upper level high back toward Russia. And then as we bring it down at 700 millibars, you can see the wind field Here's that high to the north, creating stronger winds out over the northern Bering Sea, and then a broad area of 50 to 65 knot winds out over the lower Gulf and into the North Pacific. So finally, at 3,000 feet, though, the most notable winds are out over the Bering Sea, coming in off the southwest coast in excess of 50 knots, 50 to near 60 knots. High pressure circulation up there along the Russian Arctic coast, with low pressure here out toward the eastern central Aleutians, and then a broader southerly flow aloft. This will translate where we have those stronger winds to isolated severe turbulence, especially along the lower Yukon Delta westward out over the Bering, extending back towards St. Matthew. Surface to 3,000 feet, a broad area of moderate turbulence there along the west, surface to 4,000 feet, and then surface to 6,000 feet along areas of the Gulf Coast, including the Panhandle, Kodiak Island, in through the Alaska Peninsula, and then finally out there in through the western Aleutians.
Just as the sun is part of weather on Earth, it also affects weather in space. The sun creates solar wind by steadily releasing a flow of plasma particles in all directions around it. Sometimes the sun gives off a flash of light and X-rays. This is known as a solar flare. When massive bursts of particles explode into space, we call it a coronal mass ejection, or CME. When a CME is directed toward Earth, it hits the magnetosphere, the magnetic field around our planet that protects us. If the storm is large, we may even get to enjoy a light display in the sky called the auroras. In space, satellites may be damaged, and astronauts should take cover. On Earth, people do not feel any physical effects. We may lose electricity in some areas, polar flights may be rerouted, and satellite services may be disrupted. While these situations aren't ideal, they are rare and fixable. This is why we will continue to study the sun and its interactions with Earth and the solar system.
Longing for more space, open skies, and exotic travel? Then look up, about 30 to 600 miles straight up, at the ionosphere, Earth's interface to space. Nestled far above the clouds but below outer space, this little understood destination invites you to explore its many features. Experience both the weather from Earth and the weather from space. Marvel at the ballet of radio waves and navigation signals, like GPS, leaping through this particle paradise. Sit back, relax, and take in the aurora, some satellites, and the International Space Station as they sail by. And you'll want your camera handy for one of the region's signature features, bright and colorful air glow. This daily show is made possible by the ionosphere's own swirling charged particles, because that's what the ionosphere is. It's all charged particles. During the day, enjoy the sea of particles, freshly energized by the sun. As the sun sets, this particle party relaxes and the air glow thins. Our quieter nightlife lets you gaze into clearer skies. The ionosphere is in constant motion, an amazing effect of space weather. Don't miss when solar storms rain down. The storm separates the particles even more, making this colorful region delightfully more dense in some places and stunningly sparse in others. And don't forget about storms from Earth below. Your weather from back home also stirs up this one-of-a-kind destination. Experience the unique beauty of every season, as changes in Earth's atmosphere, daily and annually, can create pressure waves, changing the ionosphere's shape and density. Venture to the equator, where our particles are packed in lush and thick. Cruise along a magnetic field line and see how the ionosphere's charged material also interacts with Earth's own magnetic field. Don't miss the superhighway of particles zipping out to space and back down to the planet. This unpredictable parade of charged particles can help you unplug and unwind. This is because the crowd of particles can garble the radio and satellite communications from home. The ionosphere welcomes you to discover more about this little-known region. After all, Once you've explored this interface to space, who knows how much farther you'll be able to go.
When a star, bigger and more massive than the Sun, runs out of fuel at the end of its life, its core collapses while the outer layers are blown off in a supernova explosion. What's left behind depends on the star's original mass. A star roughly 10 to 20 times our Sun leaves behind a neutron star. A more massive star becomes a black hole. Unlike black holes, neutron stars are directly observable, usually as pulsars, the lighthouses of the cosmos. Discovered 50 years ago, they are the densest observable objects in the universe. Neutron stars compress up to twice the Sun's mass into a city-sized sphere. Matter is packed so tightly that a teaspoon of neutron star interior would weigh more than 1 billion tons on Earth. Still, the nature of the ultra-dense matter in the cores of neutron stars is unknown. Because neutron stars pack so much mass into such a tiny volume, they produce gravity strong enough to bend the light they emit, distorting their appearance in a way that enables the mass and size of the star to be measured. Scientists cannot reproduce the extreme conditions in and around neutron stars on Earth. They must look into the galaxy to answer decades-old questions about extreme matter and gravity. NASA's Neutron Star Interior Composition Explorer mission, or NISA, will make X-ray observations of neutron stars from its perch on the International Space Station. It will give astronomers more insight into these mysterious objects, helping determine what is under their surface. A multi-purpose mission, NISA includes a technology demonstration called Sextant. It will analyze NISA's observations to validate the use of rapidly rotating neutron stars as navigation beacons for travel in deep space throughout the solar system and beyond.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and it's now time to look at the marine weather segment of our show. Start out with the ice edge. We have plenty of ice in place all along the Arctic coast down through the Chukchi Sea coastline and Bering Strait. There are some openings in the ice there between Utqiagvik and Wainwright, pulling away there with those brisk east-northeast winds that have been occurring. But more importantly, we've had some strong winds along areas of the west coast, Kotzebue Sound, surrounding areas there of the Seward Peninsula into Norton Sound, and then along the southwest coast. The ice is going to continue to advance south and a bit westward as we go through the early week. Plenty of cold air in place, very cold temperatures coming in with that strong northeasterly flow off of the mainland. So we don't anticipate much of a change, at least in the short term, but milder air is going to begin to work its way up through the Gulf as we go through this week. And as a result, frontal waves are going to be moving through and creating at times breezier conditions than others. Right now, though, coming up for Monday, winds will generally be out of the southeast to east, 25 to 30 knots for the inner channels of the Panhandle. Waves could be as high as 10 feet down around Dixon Entrance, 5 feet elsewhere up through the interior. And then for the outer coast, southwest winds 25 to 30 knots, south of Sitka waves 19, 20 feet, more southerly winds 20 knots, northwest of Sitka up through off of Yakutat, and waves generally running there 18, 19 feet. And then on Tuesday, winds will be southeast to south around 20 knots for the inner channels, waves generally running 3, 4 feet. For the outer coast, winds will be out of the south, 30 knots there southeast of Yakutat, and 35 knot southerly gales once you get west of Yakutat, waves generally running 16 to 17 feet in the open waters of the Gulf. Further west, northwestern Gulf winds will be out of the south, 25 to 30 knots, waves 18 to 19 feet off the Kenai and just to the east-northeast of Kodiak. In Cook Inlet, the lower portion of the inlet where there is open water, 20 to 25 knot north to northeast winds with waves around 5-6 feet, and east winds 15 knots, 3-foot waves in Prince William Sound. For areas off the Kenai on Tuesday, look for more of an east-southeast wind flow, anywhere from 20 to as high as 30 knots, waves 11 to 15 feet. East winds 20 knots, 3-foot waves in Prince William Sound, and then winds southeast to south in Cook Inlet as much as 20 to 25 knots there from Anchor Point southward. And then across Kodiak Island, we have a frontal boundary that's going to be kind of hung up in this region. And you can see the wind shift ahead of it, southwesterly winds, upwards of 30 knots, waves in excess of 20 feet as you get into the open waters of the North Pacific and Western Gulf. Look for northeast to southeast winds, 25 to 30 knots there. Waves where there is open water, 5 feet there in Bristol Bay, 7 feet north of Cold Bay. And then on Tuesday, winds not quite as strong, generally out of the east, southeast around Kodiak Island, 20 to 25 knots, waves 4 feet, Shelikof Strait, 12 to 13 feet south of there. And then look for winds out of the northeast to east, 15 to 20 knots, waves 3 to as high as 5 feet north of Cold Bay. The Aleutians, things settle down a bit, at least for a little while. Eastern Aleutians, a bit of a mix, winds north of Nikolsky and Dutch Harbor, 10 to 15 knots. South of there, 20 to 25 knot winds. And then as you get further west, winds turn more west to northwest, 25 to 30 knots. And by the time we get into Tuesday, winds will be going, increasing out toward the west. Still northwest, especially just west of Dutch Harbor, 20 to 25 knots, but picking up out of the west-northwest to 40-knot gales, especially from around Adak westward. Waves could be as high as 14 to 18 feet on the North Pacific side, 9 to 13 feet on the Bering side. And more interestingly, as I mentioned, strong northeast to north winds across the ice here in the northern and eastern Bering coming in off the mainland. Pretty cold temperatures. This ice will continue to drift south and a bit westward as we go through the early week, where there is open water, 17-foot waves south of St. Matthew, 14 feet vicinity of St. Paul, St. George, and then north winds generally continue as high as 35 knots there at St. Matthew, waves 10 to 15 feet in the open water. Along the Arctic coast, northeast winds 20 knots, turning down through the lower Chukchi Sea, increasing 30 to 35 knots, passing through the Bering Strait, so there could still be some shifting of ice. And on Tuesday, winds stiffen up a bit, northeasterly 25 knots, Katovik through Utqiagvik down through Cape Lisburne, and then 35 to 30 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea and down through the Bering Strait to the north side of St. Lawrence Island. So thank you for watching this show, and I hope you have a great week.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.